Rick Sullivan believed he could measure a person's worth in two ways: the watch they wore and the hesitation in their handshake. He'd built Sullivan Tech, one of New York's most profitable data analytics firms, on that belief. Every morning he'd stride into his 52nd floor office, glance at the city skyline reflecting in the glass walls, and remind himself that power wasn't given, it was seized and flaunted. The office was designed like a temple for wealth. Black marble floors polished enough to mirror the sky, an antique Persian rug beneath the grand oak desk, abstract paintings that no one truly understood but everyone pretended to admire. And behind all that shimmer, the invisible army, janitors, maintenance workers, and cleaning staff, who came after dark to erase the fingerprints of the powerful. Among them was Carmen Johnson, a quiet woman in her late 30s who moved through those corridors like a ghost, efficient, invisible, respectful. Rick never knew her name until that morning. That morning, fate decided to shake the walls of his glass tower. The arrival was a Friday, the day Rick liked to schedule light entertainment. That usually meant humiliating someone to remind the rest of the office who was in control. At 10 a.m., his secretary's voice came through the intercom. "Sir, the new cleaning schedule includes Ms. Johnson and her daughter today." Rick leaned back, smirking. "Daughter? What, she's bringing family now? Fine. Let's see the next generation of mediocrity." Minutes later, the glass doors parted with a soft hiss. Carmen entered, pushing a cart stacked with cleaning supplies. Behind her walked Lucia, a slender 12-year-old in a red t-shirt and a faded blue backpack. Her eyes darted around the room, not with fear, but with fascination, studying every inch of the empire her mother had polished for years. Rick tapped his pen against the desk. "So this is your kid?" Carmen nodded, eyes low. "Yes, sir. She's helping me today. School's closed for teacher training." Rick chuckled. "Well, maybe she'll learn what hard work looks like." Lucia's gaze met his for half a second, calm, unflinching. Rick didn't like that. He liked people who flinched. The mockery. When the cleaning began, Rick called out, "Hey, Carmen, ever teach your daughter how to dream? Or is that a luxury around here?" Carmen's cheeks flushed. "She studies hard, sir." Lucia straightened, still clutching a cloth. "I'm at the top of my class," she said simply. Rick's eyebrows rose. "Top of your class? In what mopping techniques?" The executives in the room laughed. Lucia didn't smile. "In languages." That caught Rick off guard. He twirled his pen.
"Languages, huh?
"How many?" Lucia hesitated, then spoke clearly. 9. The laughter came like thunder. Even Carmen froze, mortified. Rick leaned forward, eyes narrowing. 9 languages? You're what, 12? 13 next month, Lucia replied. "And you expect me to believe that?" Lucia shrugged. "You don't have to believe it. It's still true." The room fell quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that made Rick uncomfortable. He covered it with laughter again. "All right, Miss Genius, let's test that claim." He opened a glass cabinet behind his desk and pulled out an old manuscript. "This," he said proudly, "is a centuries-old text I bought at auction last year. Supposedly written in 6 different languages. None of my translators could decode it completely." "Think you can?" Carmen whispered. "Mr. Sullivan, please, she's just a child." But Lucia stepped forward, curiosity bright in her eyes. "May I see it?" Rick tossed it onto the table. "Knock yourself out, prodigy." The challenge, the manuscript's pages were fragile, tinted with age. Lucia bent slightly, studying the ink strokes. Her lips moved silently, tracing patterns. Rick watched, waiting for her to stutter, to fumble, to look small. But her face only grew more focused. "Interesting," she murmured. "The script changes every few lines. This part's Mandarin. This is classical Arabic. And here," she paused, "Sanskrit." Rick frowned. "You can recognize them?" "Anyone can Google alphabets these days." Lucia looked up. "Do you want me to read them or not?" The executives exchanged glances. The joke was getting uncomfortable. "Go ahead," Rick said, feigning amusement. Lucia inhaled softly and began to read. Her voice shifted rhythm with each tongue. A sharp staccato in Mandarin, a melodic curve in Arabic, a deep chant in Sanskrit. The sounds echoed strangely in that sterile, expensive room, ancient life breathing in modern glass. Rick's smirk faltered. His pen stopped spinning. When Lucia stopped, she translated calmly. "It's a poem about wisdom. about how true knowledge doesn't live in palaces but in hearts that keep learning. The silence that followed felt heavier than marble. The turning point, Rick forced a laugh. Nice trick. You must have memorized that from the internet. Lucia tilted her head. You can check if you like. The first stanza says, she quoted a phrase fluently, then explained, that line doesn't appear anywhere online. It's written in a hybrid dialect of Tang-era Chinese and Sanskrit-influenced Persian. It hasn't been digitized yet. The air changed. One of Rick's senior analysts who had once studied linguistics blinked in disbelief. She's right. That dialect's almost extinct. How did you... Lucia smiled faintly. My friend Mr. Ahmed used to be a professor in Damascus. He drives a taxi now. He teaches Arabic and classical texts at the community library. He also introduced me to hybrid linguistic roots. Languages borrow from each other, like people. Carmen stood frozen, tears pooling in her eyes. Rick didn't speak. His face had shifted from mockery to something else, a look that belonged to a man who'd just seen the world through a crack he didn't know existed. Lucia added softly, You said earlier that money is proof of intelligence, but maybe intelligence is proof of perseverance. Her words hung in the air like music. Rick dismissed them with a wave of his hand, or tried to. Enough fairy tales. You've made your point. But something inside him had already shifted. He couldn't explain why, but when Lucia and her mother left, he sat staring at the old manuscript for a long time. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel rich. He felt small. Rick Sullivan hadn't slept that night. The lights of Manhattan glittered through his penthouse windows, but his mind kept replaying the same moment. The little girl's voice shifting between ancient tongues, her tone steady, unbothered, almost divine. He'd faced senators, CEOs, and foreign ministers. None had made him feel the way Lucia Johnson did, small, uneducated, exposed. Haunted by a child's words, Rick poured himself another glass of scotch, his fifth for the night. Money isn't proof of intelligence, she had said. He laughed bitterly. Says a kid whose mom cleans floors. But even as he said it aloud, it rang hollow. He walked over to his desk, opened the manuscript again, and ran his fingers across the faded ink. He didn't understand a single word, yet a 13-year-old had danced through it like a song. It wasn't just the language, but it was the confidence. Somewhere deep in the vault of his pride, a door creaked open. He'd built his empire believing that the poor lacked discipline, that education was for those who could afford to buy time. But Lucia's composure had fractured that illusion. He needed to know more. The investigation. The next morning, he called his head of security. Find everything about Carmen Johnson and her daughter. School, address, background, of the works. The man nodded. On it, sir. By noon, the report landed on Rick's desk. Name: Lucia Johnson. Age: 12 years. 11-month school, PS 214, Harlem. Performance, straight A's. Language Arts Awards 3 consecutive years. Mother: Carmen Johnson, cleaning staff at Sullivan Tech. Father: deceased. Former bus driver died in an accident 5 years ago. Rick frowned. The file was small, thin, a few printed pages stapled together. Nothing unusual, the report read at the end. Typical low-income family. But that word, typical, made Rick's jaw tighten. There was nothing typical about that girl. At the library that afternoon, he left his skyscraper for the first time in months without security detail. His driver was confused. Sir, are we heading to Midtown? No, Rick replied. Harlem. He didn't say why. The library was old. Bricks chipped, paint faded. But the moment he stepped in, something felt alive. Children whispered at computer desks. Pages turned. Dust and light danced in the air. He asked the receptionist, I'm looking for a girl named Lucia Johnson. The woman smiled. Ah, our little language prodigy. She's here most evenings. Rick raised an eyebrow. Language prodigy? She volunteers, the woman explained. Teaches basic Spanish and French to the younger kids. Rick blinked. She teaches? Yes, sir. She started 2 years ago. Says it helps her practice. Smartest kid we've got. The woman pointed toward the back. There she was, Lucia, sitting cross-legged on the floor, a group of children around her. She was explaining something in slow, rhythmic French, her voice full of patience. A boy raised his hand. Lucia switched languages, English to Spanish, then back to French, seamlessly. The kids giggled, trying to imitate her accent. Rick watched from a distance, feeling something unfamiliar. Admiration. When the class ended, Lucia noticed him. Her expression flickered, recognition, then caution. Mr. Sullivan? She asked. He cleared his throat. You teach here? Only when they need help, she said simply. The library offers language circles. I fill in when teachers can't make it. He nodded awkwardly. Impressive, Lucia smiled faintly. Learning is free here. That's why I come, Rick looked around. The furniture was old. The ceiling fan creaked. The carpet was torn. But every face in that room was glowing with life. Lessons of the forgotten Rick walked with Lucia after her class. Your mother must be proud, he said. Lucia shrugged. She worries more than she celebrates. But yes, she's proud. They stepped outside. The sun was setting, streaking gold through the narrow streets. Rick hesitated. How did you learn 9 languages? Lucia smiled. Not all at once. And not from school. From people. People? Yes, the city talks if you listen. She began counting softly on her fingers. Spanish from Mrs. Ruiz downstairs. She doesn't speak English well, but she taught me verbs while she cooked. Arabic, from Mr. Ahmed, a cab driver who used to be a literature professor. French, from a Haitian teacher who volunteers weekends. Mandarin, and from Mrs. Wong, who ran a laundromat until rent got too high. Portuguese, and from a delivery guy from Brazil. He taught me slang between trips, the rest from books, audio tapes, and YouTube channels. She said it all without pride, just as fact. Rick was silent. His mind churned. This wasn't charity or miracle. It was survival through brilliance. You learn from everyone, he murmured. Lucia nodded. Everyone knows something. The world is one big classroom if you stop thinking you're the only teacher. Her words hit him harder than any boardroom defeat. Carmen's apartment a few days later. Rick drove to their neighborhood, a narrow complex where the elevators creaked and paint peeled off doors. Carmen opened the door in surprise, her cleaning uniform still on. Mr. Sullivan? She gasped. He raised a hand. Don't worry. I'm not here for business. Lucia appeared behind her, eyes wide. I just wanted to return this, he said, holding out a folder. Inside were Lucia's school records, but he had added something else. A letter of recommendation typed and signed by him. For scholarship consideration, he explained. Your daughter deserves more than what this city offers. Carmen's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, he muttered, uncomfortable. Just let her keep studying. Lucia's voice was gentle. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan, but I'm okay. I'm learning just fine. He blinked. You're turning down a scholarship? Lucia smiled shyly. It's not that. I'm just not ready to leave the people who taught me everything. Rick stared at her, this child refusing privilege for loyalty. It baffled him. Shattered beliefs that night, Rick walked through his office, past the portraits of innovation and profit. He realized something. Every quote on those walls, success through strategy, power through precision, where he suddenly felt shallow. He thought of Lucia's phrase, everyone knows something. It haunted him. He looked at his reflection in the glass, the millionaire who measured worth in watches. The man who thought education came with an invoice. Now a janitor's daughter had taught him humility. He felt embarrassed, but also alive. For the first time, Rick wanted to learn. The test 2 weeks later, Lucia received a letter from Sullivan Tech. It wasn't about cleaning. It was an invitation, a language innovation program. Rick had created it overnight, a community scholarship program to support underprivileged students who excelled in linguistics, technology, or cultural education. Carmen couldn't believe it. Is this real? She whispered. Lucia smiled, reading the letter twice. He means it. At the conference the following month, Rick hosted a global summit at his headquarters. Executives from Japan, Dubai, Brazil, and France filled the glass conference hall. In the middle of the presentation, a translation system malfunctioned. Audio feeds overlapping, captions glitching. The audience grew restless. Rick's team panicked. Then a soft voice spoke from the back. May I help? Lucia stepped forward. She wore a simple white dress, no uniform, no label, just quiet confidence. She walked to the microphone and began translating Japanese to English, then Portuguese to French, switching seamlessly. The crowd fell silent, awestruck. Within minutes, the presentation continued, fluid, precise. When it ended, the room erupted in applause. Rick stood at the podium, pride swelling in his chest. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, this young lady is Lucia Johnson, the future of what intelligence truly means, knowledge shared, not bought. Lucia blushed. Carmen cried quietly at the back, and Rick, for the first time in decades, felt that teaching someone might be more powerful than commanding them. The moment Lucia walked off the stage that day, the world seemed to move faster. Reporters wrote about her. Social media caught fire. 30-year-old polyglot translates for CEOs. Janitor's daughter stuns corporate world with 9 languages. Every major outlet wanted her story. And behind each headline was the same astonished question. How could someone like her be so extraordinary? Rick Sullivan had sparked it all. And yet, as the spotlight grew brighter, so did the shadows that followed. The price of fame. Within a week, the library where Lucia volunteered was flooded with journalists. Camera flashes popped between the dusty shelves. Carmen stood near the door, nervous and protective, trying to keep strangers from cornering her daughter. Lucia, meanwhile, remained calm, polite, articulate, and impossibly poised for her age. "I just like learning," she said in every interview. Languages make the world feel smaller, kinder. Her humility only deepened the fascination. Rick watched it all unfold from his office. Part of him was proud, the kind of pride that comes not from ownership but from witnessing something pure rise from impossible odds. But another part of him was uneasy. He had seen the world turn geniuses into spectacles before, and he knew how quickly admiration could curdle into envy. The critics appear. By the end of the second week, the noise had shifted. An online influencer sneered, "This is obviously staged." No kid from Harlem learns 9 languages on their own. A corporate executive whispered at a dinner party, "Sullivan's just using her as a PR stunt." And worst of all, one of Rick's own board members questioned him directly. "Rick, this scholarship program, it's making us look soft. Investors like strength, not charity." Rick slammed his glass down. "She's not charity. She's proof that talent has no address." But the man only smirked. "Talent's good for headlines, Rick, but you're risking the company's reputation for a cleaning woman's daughter." For the first time, Rick realized what Lucia was up against, not ignorance, but the cruelty of disbelief. Lucia's struggle at school. Things got worse. Some classmates mocked her accent. Others accused her of lying. "Bet you can't even say hello in half those languages." One boy shouted during lunch. Lucia tried to laugh it off, but it hurt. That evening, she stayed longer at the library. Her mentor, Mr. Ahmed, found her sitting quietly in a corner, her notes untouched. "What's wrong, little one?" he asked in his gentle Syrian accent. Lucia hesitated. "People think I'm pretending," he chuckled softly. "If you are pretending, then you are the best pretender I've ever met." Lucia smiled faintly. Mr. Ahmed continued, "Do you know what happens when light shines too bright? It attracts both butterflies and moths. You can't stop either from coming. You can only keep being the light." She nodded, his words sinking deep into her heart. A door closes. The following week, Rick's assistant entered his office, pale-faced. "Sir, Carmen Johnson has been suspended from the cleaning staff." Rick blinked. "What? Why?" "There were complaints," the assistant said uneasily. "Apparently, she was accused of taking confidential papers from an executive's desk. HR says they found a file in her cleaning cart." Rick stood up instantly. "That's ridiculous. Carmen's worked here 8 years without a single mistake." "I know, sir, but the cameras—" Rick's voice rose. "Who filed the complaint?" The assistant hesitated. "Mr. Trenton." Rick felt a surge of anger. Of course, Daniel Trenton, one of his board members. The same man who'd called Lucia a publicity stunt. Confrontation, Rick stormed into Trenton's office. "You set her up." Trenton looked up from his laptop, pretending confusion. "Excuse me?" "Don't play dumb." "Carmen didn't steal anything," Trenton smirked. "Security footage doesn't lie, Rick. Maybe she got too comfortable after her daughter's little performance." Rick clenched his fists. "You planted that file. Prove it." The silence was thick. Trenton leaned back, satisfied. "You're letting your emotions interfere with business. Don't forget, this company thrives because we stay elite, not sentimental." Rick's voice dropped low and dangerous. "Maybe that's why it's dying. Because people like you think humanity is a weakness." He turned and walked out before his temper could explode. The breaking point that night. Carmen sat at their kitchen table, her hands trembling. "I didn't take anything, Lucia." "I swear." Lucia reached over, holding her mother's hands. "I know, Mom, we'll fix it." But Carmen's voice cracked. "They'll fire me, baby. Without that job, we'll lose the apartment." "I can't." Lucia's jaw tightened. "Mr. Sullivan won't let that happen." Carmen shook her head bitterly. "He's rich, Lucia. We're replaceable." For the first time, Lucia felt anger, and not at her mother, but at the world that kept proving her right. She opened her backpack, pulling out the worn manuscript Rick had given her to study months ago. Her fingers brushed over the ancient words. The poem whispered back, "True wealth lies not in gold, but in the hands that lift others." Lucia closed her eyes. "Then I'll make them listen," she whispered. The board meeting. 3 days later, Rick called an emergency meeting. Every board member sat around the long glass table. Carmen's suspension was on the agenda, but so was something much larger. Lucia and Carmen entered quietly, their presence turning heads. Trenton sneered. "What is this, Rick? Bring your charity case to work day?" Rick ignored him. "Ms. Johnson's been accused of theft. I've reviewed the security footage myself." Trenton smirked. And Rick pressed a button. The screen lit up. Footage from the cleaning shift. Carmen entered the office, wiped the desk, picked up a folder, and placed it back. Nothing unusual. But then, another figure entered moments later, Trenton's assistant, who slid the file into the cleaning cart when Carmen wasn't looking. Gasps filled the room. Rick paused the video. That assistant has since disappeared. His resignation letter was submitted 10 minutes after the incident. Trenton's face turned red. "This is outrageous," Rick cut him off. "What's outrageous is using power to humiliate honest people. Carmen Johnson is reinstated immediately. And you, Mr. Trenton, are relieved of your position pending investigation." The room went silent. Lucia looked at her mother, eyes wide. Carmen covered her mouth, tears streaming silently. Rick exhaled, finally feeling something close to justice. A private talk after the meeting. Rick walked Carmen and Lucia to the lobby. Carmen whispered, "I don't know how to thank you." Rick smiled softly. "You don't need to. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" He looked at Lucia. "Don't stop learning. And don't let people like me or Trenton and make you smaller." Lucia nodded. "I won't, but—" "Mr. Sullivan?" "Yes? You learned something too, didn't you?" Rick chuckled. "Yeah, I did." Lucia tilted her head. "What was it?" He looked out the glass window at the city skyline. "That intelligence without empathy is just arrogance in a suit." Lucia smiled. "Then maybe you're learning your 10th language." Rick laughed, a real, warm laugh that startled even himself. The invitation a month later. Lucia received a letter, this time not from Sullivan Tech, but from the United Nations Youth Linguistics Program. They'd seen her conference performance. They wanted her to represent youth innovation at an international summit in Geneva. Carmen cried again. Rick insisted on sponsoring the entire trip. "No conditions," he said firmly. "Just promise you'll come back and teach me a few words." Lucia grinned. "I'll teach you more than words." In Geneva, the hall shimmered with flags from every nation. Lucia stood among delegates twice her age, her heart pounding but her mind calm. When it was her turn, she walked to the podium. "Languages," she began, "aren't just sounds. They're bridges. Every word you learn from someone different is a step toward peace." Her voice echoed through the chamber, steady, bright, full of hope. Rick watched from the audience, his chest swelling with pride. He thought of the man he used to be, the one who measured intelligence in luxury watches. And he realized how poor that man had been. Now standing among leaders, he felt richer than ever. The full circle. When Lucia returned home, the first thing she did wasn't celebrate. She went straight to the Harlem Library and the place that started it all. She hugged Mr. Ahmed. "You were right," she said. "You can't stop the moths, but you can keep shining." Rick joined them a few minutes later, quietly placing a donation envelope on the librarian's desk. It wasn't just money. It was a partnership, a new initiative called the Lucia Project, aimed at funding multilingual programs for underprivileged children across the city. Carmen stood beside them, smiling through tears. Lucia looked at Rick. "You really did learn another language." Rick grinned. "What language is that?" "Kindness," she said. He nodded slowly. "Fluent thanks to my teacher." Lucia Johnson stood on the rooftop of her apartment building, looking out over Harlem's patchwork of lights. The city buzzed below her like 1,000 conversations in 1,000 tongues, but tonight she felt strangely mute. Only a month earlier she had been in Geneva, shaking hands with ambassadors. Now she was back home, facing a world that looked the same, yet somehow felt heavier. A sudden shadow it started with her mother's cough. At first Carmen brushed it off, just the winter air. But within weeks, her breathing grew shallow, her energy dimmed, and one morning she fainted while mopping the kitchen floor. Lucia screamed for help. The ambulance lights reflected off cracked windows as neighbors gathered in worried silence. Hours later, at the hospital, the doctor's voice was calm but heavy. "Pneumonia, severe. She's stable for now, but she'll need weeks of rest and treatment." Lucia nodded, trying to be strong. But when she saw her mother lying pale under white sheets, she felt something inside her collapse. Carmen opened her eyes weakly. "Don't cry, baby. I'll be fine." Lucia squeezed her hand. "You always say that." Her mother smiled faintly. "And I'm usually right." But Lucia could see fear behind her smile, a fear she had never seen before. The weight of the world. Lucia tried to balance everything: school, the library, hospital visits. But exhaustion caught her like a storm. Reporters still wanted interviews. Organizations sent invitations. She ignored them all. The girl who spoke 9 languages had gone quiet. One evening she sat at the library alone. The shelves whispered with memories, laughter, lessons, dreams. Mr. Ahmed found her staring at an open book without reading. "Lucia," he said softly, "when you stop speaking, even your silence becomes a language. What are you trying to say?" She looked up, eyes red. "That I'm tired of being strong." He nodded, understanding. "Even strength needs rest. But don't confuse rest with giving up." She shook her head. "What if I lose her, Mr. Ahmed? Everything I've done, it was for her." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then you'll speak for both of you. Because love never dies. It only changes its accent." His words hit deep, but her heart still ached. Rick's visit. Meanwhile, Rick Sullivan had noticed Lucia's absence. Weeks had passed since he last saw her at the library or office. He tried calling. No answer. Finally, he drove to their apartment building. When Lucia opened the door, her eyes were swollen from sleepless nights. "Mr. Sullivan," she said softly. He stepped inside. "You should have called me." Lucia forced a smile. "You're busy running a company." He shook his head. "Not too busy for the person who changed it." When he saw Carmen lying in bed, his chest tightened. "How bad is it?" "She's getting better," Lucia whispered. "At least that's what I tell myself." Rick sat down beside her. For the first time, he looked small. Not because of money or status, but because of helplessness. He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. The company's health plan, of full coverage. "Don't argue." Lucia's eyes filled with tears. "You've done enough already." Rick shook his head. "Not nearly. You and your mother showed me what real work looks like." For a long moment, they sat in silence, 2 people from different worlds, bound by something more human than either could explain. A letter in the night. One night, Lucia found a note on her bedside table, her mother's handwriting, trembling but firm. "My Lucia, if you ever feel lost, remember the girl who learned the world through words. Each language you speak is a part of me living in you. So when you talk to the world, I'll still be there. In every sentence, every sound. Love, Mom." Lucia pressed the letter to her chest and cried for the first time in weeks. The silence breaks. By spring, Carmen's health began to improve. But the experience had changed Lucia. She returned to school quieter, more introspective. She still smiled, but there was a distance in her eyes, the kind that comes from understanding mortality too young. During a class presentation, a teacher asked her to speak about her time at the United Nations. Lucia hesitated, then said, "I thought language was about words, but it's really about connection. When my mom got sick, I realized silence can speak too, sometimes louder than any word." The class fell completely still. Even her teacher blinked away tears. Rick's past. Meanwhile, Rick found himself battling ghosts of his own. His father had died when he was 19, a mechanic who'd worked 12-hour shifts so Rick could study. But Rick had never gone to the funeral. He'd been too busy securing an internship. Now, as he watched Lucia care for her mother with fierce devotion, guilt gnawed at him. He visited his father's old workshop, abandoned, dusty, On the workbench sat a cracked photograph. Rick as a boy holding a wrench, grinning beside his father. Rick sat down, burying his face in his hands. "You raised me to be strong," he whispered. "But I forgot to be kind." That night, he wrote a personal letter to Lucia, one he never intended to publish. "You once said money isn't proof of intelligence. You were right. Intelligence isn't about knowing everything. It's about knowing what matters. You reminded me what matters. Thank you." He mailed it the next morning. The fire 2 weeks later, tragedy struck again. At 2 a.m., Lucia woke to the smell of smoke. Fire alarms blared. Screams echoed through the hallway. "Mom!" she shouted, shaking Carmen awake. The fire had started in a lower apartment, faulty wiring, and was spreading fast. They stumbled through the smoke-filled corridor, coughing, choking. On the stairs, Lucia heard a cry, a child trapped behind a jammed door. Without thinking, she ran toward it. "Lucia!" Carmen screamed. The heat was unbearable. Lucia kicked the door open and found a little boy huddled under a blanket. She scooped him into her arms and ran. Flames roared down the hallway as firefighters burst in, guiding them out. Outside, as rain began to fall, Lucia handed the boy to his sobbing mother. Carmen clung to her daughter, trembling. "Don't you ever scare me like that again?" Lucia coughed, her throat raw. "He was crying in Arabic," she whispered weakly. "He said mama, but no one understood." Carmen stared at her. "And you did." Lucia smiled faintly through tears. "That's why we learn, right? So we can listen when others can't." Rebuilding the building was declared unsafe. Rick arranged temporary housing for all displaced families and quietly covered repair costs. When Carmen protested, he simply said, "It's not charity. It's gratitude." Lucia spent the next few weeks helping translate for tenants who didn't speak English, Spanish, Haitian Creole, Arabic, switching languages like breathing. Each time she bridged a conversation between a landlord and a frightened family, she realized something profound. Her gift wasn't about brilliance. It was about service. The return to the library. When the library reopened after renovations, Lucia organized her first community event, The Language of Hope, a free workshop for kids from every background. Posters went up across Harlem. Learn to speak. Learn to connect. Rick attended quietly, standing in the back as Lucia taught children how to say hello in 10 different languages. "Every word," she told them, "is a door. You don't know what's behind it until you open it. So don't be afraid to knock." Applause filled the room. Rick caught Carmen's eye and smiled. "She's not just learning languages anymore," he said softly. "She's teaching humanity." Carmen nodded, eyes shining. "That's what I raised her to do." A quiet victory later that evening. As the library lights dimmed, Lucia sat with Rick and her mother by the window. Outside, the city hummed, taxis, laughter, wind like a living symphony. Lucia broke the silence. "You know what I realized? Every person I meet gives me a word, a new one. My mom gave me love. Mr. Ahmed gave me wisdom, you gave me faith. Put them together, and that's my 10th language." Rick chuckled. "You keep adding to my lessons, don't you?" Lucia smiled. "That's how language works. It never stops growing." They sat together, watching the stars blink above Harlem, quiet, content, connected. The sun rose gently over New York, spilling gold over glass towers and crowded rooftops. Inside the Harlem Library, children's voices echoed. Laughter, new words, dreams taking shape in every accent. At the center stood Lucia Johnson, now 15. Taller, more confident, but still carrying the same humble spark that had once silenced a billionaire. The Language of Hope program had grown beyond Harlem. There were now 5 branches across the city, all free, all led by volunteers who once stood where Lucia had been, unseen, unheard, underestimated, and behind it all, quietly funding every book, desk, and scholarship, was Rick Sullivan. But Rick himself had changed even more than Lucia. A man rewritten gone were the golden cufflinks and arrogance. He still wore suits, but his posture had softened. The once feared CEO now spent his mornings visiting classrooms, speaking to kids about business ethics and empathy. Reporters called it the Sullivan Shift. Some accused him of buying redemption. Others simply didn't understand why a man worth billions spent time helping children learn basic greetings. In Swahili or Urdu, Rick didn't care what they thought anymore. He had learned something money could never teach, that success without compassion was just noise without melody, and that melody had a name. Lucia, the proposal one spring afternoon. Rick invited Lucia and Carmen to his office, the same marble and glass room where it all began. But this time there were no laughter or mocking smirks. The air was warm with purpose. Rick stood by the window, hands in his pockets. "Lucia," he began, "I've been thinking about expanding the language of hope, not just in New York, globally." Lucia blinked. "Globally?" Rick nodded. "We'll build language centers in underprivileged communities across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And I want you to lead it." Lucia's mouth fell open. "Me? I'm only 15, Rick smiled. "When I was 15, I was still learning how to lie my way into confidence. You're already teaching the world what it means to be real." Carmen clasped her hands together. "Mr. Sullivan, that's beyond generous," he shook his head. "No, Mrs. Johnson, it's justice. Because talent like your daughter's shouldn't depend on luck. It should inspire a system." Lucia's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if I can lead something that big." Rick stepped closer. "Then start small. One word, one child. That's how you built all this, isn't it?" Lucia smiled through the tears. "Okay, let's do it." The journey begins months later. Lucia boarded her first flight to Kenya. Rick and Carmen stood at the airport gate, watching her walk toward the plane, backpack on, heart wide open. Rick handed her a small notebook. "A gift," he said. On the cover, embossed in gold, were the words, "The 10th language." Lucia raised an eyebrow. "What's that supposed to mean?" Rick smiled. "You'll know when you hear it. Africa Speaks Kenya was loud, colorful, and alive with rhythm. Children ran barefoot across the dusty fields near the First Language of Hope Center, laughing as Lucia tried to pronounce local phrases. "Jambo!" they shouted. "Jambo!" Lucia replied, grinning as they cheered. Over the weeks, she taught English and Spanish while learning Swahili herself. The center became a beacon. Kids from nearby villages came to read, write, and connect. But more than words, Lucia taught them pride. She told them, "Your language is power. Never let anyone make you feel small for speaking differently." Each time she said it, she remembered her own journey, the marble floor, the laughter, and the quiet defiance that had started everything. Rick's promise back in New York, Rick began to slow down. His health was fine, but his reflection told him time was moving faster than money could buy. He spent hours writing letters, not business memos, but stories of what he had learned, about humility, respect, and second chances. One letter he wrote by hand, addressed to Lucia. "When you came into my office, I thought I was testing you, but you were testing me. You showed me that the world doesn't change through power, but through understanding. If I leave this world before I see your dream completed, promise me you'll keep teaching, because that's what keeps people like me alive in spirit." He sealed the envelope and placed it in his desk drawer. A world united by words. 2 years passed. By 17, Lucia had already traveled to 6 countries: India, Egypt, Brazil, Morocco, South Korea, and Ghana. Each place added a new rhythm to her life, a new way to say hello, a new way to say hope. In Morocco, she met a girl who couldn't afford school books. Lucia shared her own. In India, she taught street children how to introduce themselves in English. They responded by teaching her how to say shukriya, thank you. In Brazil, she stood on a beach surrounded by kids shouting greetings in 3 languages and laughed until she cried everywhere she went. She wrote in Rick's notebook, small entries of gratitude and discovery. The Calone rainy night in Seoul, her phone rang. It was Carmen, her voice trembling. Sweetheart, it's Mr. Sullivan, he's in the hospital. Lucia froze. What happened? Heart complications. He's stable for now, but they're not sure how long. Within hours, Lucia was on a flight back to New York. The final lesson. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. Rick lay there, pale but smiling as soon as he saw her. You came fast, he said weakly. Lucia tried to smile. You taught me not to be late for important lessons. He chuckled softly. Guess this is your final exam then. Tears welled in her eyes. Don't joke like that, Rick's voice was gentle. Hey, don't cry, Professor. You've already passed. Lucia took his hand. It felt cold but steady. You remember that notebook I gave you? He asked. Yes. Did you find the 10th language yet? Lucia shook her head. I've learned hundreds of words, but I still don't know what you meant. Rick smiled faintly. It's not a language you speak. It's one you live. The language of love. You're fluent, kid. Lucia couldn't hold back the tears anymore. She leaned forward, hugging him tightly. Rick whispered, Promise me you'll keep the world talking, not shouting. Talking. I promise, she said, voice breaking. His hand squeezed hers once, firm, grateful, before growing still. The legacy Rick Sullivan's funeral drew people from every corner of the world. Business leaders, teachers, janitors, taxi drivers, and children from the Language of Hope centers he helped build. Lucia stood at the podium, wearing a simple black dress and a string of prayer beads from Kenya around her wrist. Rick Sullivan once laughed at me for saying I spoke 9 languages, she began softly. But he taught me the 10th, the language of love, the one that doesn't need translation. She paused, scanning the faces in the crowd, some crying, some smiling. He proved that people can change, that even those who build walls can learn to build bridges, and because of him, thousands of children now believe their voices matter. That's his legacy. And it's ours to protect. Applause rippled through the hall like a heartbeat. The foundation months later, the Sullivan Johnson Foundation for Global Education officially launched, co-founded by Lucia and Carmen. Its mission: to teach, to translate, and to connect every child who's ever been told they don't belong. From Harlem to Nairobi, from Mumbai to Rio, classrooms filled with laughter and new beginnings. Lucia continued traveling, now as both a student and a teacher. Every new word she learned felt like a whisper from those who believed in her. Her mother, Mr. Ahmed, and the man who once laughed but ended up rewriting his soul. The return years later, Lucia, now in her 20s, returned to that same marble office on the 52nd floor. It had been preserved as part of the foundation's headquarters. She walked to the desk, tracing her fingers over the smooth surface where it all began. Outside the window, Manhattan glowed, alive, vast, diverse. She pulled Rick's notebook from her bag and opened it. The last page was blank except for a single line written in his handwriting. When words unite hearts, the world finally listens. Lucia smiled, tears in her eyes, and whispered to the city below, I hear you. Then, in the quiet room, she began to speak softly, in English, Spanish, Arabic, Mandarin, French, Swahili, and more, until her voice became a symphony of languages blending into one truth. We are one conversation.